6 years of cold coffee mornings, midnight phone calls, and unplanned dinners, and neither of them ever had the courage to call it what it actually was. But that afternoon, in the middle of a backyard graduation party, with paper streamers still hanging crooked from the fence posts and someone's aunt burning hamburgers on the grill, a mother said the quiet part out loud. And everything Ethan Brooks thought he understood about his own life cracked straight down the middle. If you've ever loved someone and said nothing, stay until the end. Drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. The drive from Ethan's apartment to the Hayes family home took exactly 22 minutes on a good day. Ethan knew this because he had made the drive more times than he could count, for birthday dinners, for crisis calls, for Sundays that had no reason to exist except that Victoria had texted come over, Mom made too much food again, and somehow that was reason enough. Today was different. Today had a purpose. He had a box of decorations in the trunk, a bag of ice he'd picked up from the gas station 2 blocks over, and a 7-year-old in the back seat who had been singing the same 4 bars of a cartoon theme song for the last 9 minutes without stopping. Lily. He glanced in the rearview mirror. She looked up from the drawing she was making on the back of a grocery receipt. What? You've sung that same part about 12 times. I know. She looked back down. I like that part. Ethan exhaled through his nose and turned onto Millbrook Avenue. The Hayes house came into view at the end of the cul-de-sac, a wide colonial with a wraparound porch, white shutters that had been repainted exactly once since he'd known the family, and a front yard that was already showing signs of pre-party chaos. Folding tables were being carried around the side of the house. Someone had tied balloons to the mailbox. One had already escaped and was drifting up past the roofline. He pulled into the driveway behind a minivan he didn't recognize and cut the engine. We're here, he announced. Lily was already unbuckling herself. Is Miss Victoria here? Probably. Is she going to let me help with the cake? You'll have to ask her. Can you ask her for me? Lily. What? You're 7, not 2. Ask her yourself. She made a face at him. The specific face she had been perfecting since she was about 4 years old, the one that somehow communicated both deep personal offense and total indifference. And then she pushed the car door open and hopped out onto the driveway. Ethan sat still for a moment after she left. He did that sometimes. Took 30 seconds before walking into a place. It wasn't anxiety exactly, more like a habit he'd developed after the years when he'd had to show up to things alone and needed a moment to shift gears before he got there. The Hayes house didn't make him nervous. That wasn't the reason he was sitting in the car. He just needed a second. That was all. He grabbed the box from the trunk, pulled the bag of ice up onto his shoulder, and walked toward the front door without knocking. He hadn't knocked at this house in at least 4 years. At some point, the rule had simply dissolved, without anyone mentioning it. The inside of the house smelled like it always did before a party. Garlic, something baking, and the particular combination of 3 different scented candles that Victoria's mother, Patricia Hayes, believed were complementary, and that everyone else in the family silently disagreed about. Ethan! Patricia appeared from the kitchen doorway, still holding a wooden spoon, and her face did the thing it always did when she saw him. A full, immediate brightness, like a light switch being flipped. You brought ice. Perfect. The Hendersons are coming, and Dave Henderson will drink everything in the cooler before noon if we let him. I got 2 bags. One's still in the car. You're a saint. She pointed the spoon toward the back of the house. Victoria's in the backyard trying to argue with the string lights. Go settle it before she has a breakdown. She doesn't have breakdowns. She's been out there for 40 minutes, and she hasn't asked anyone for help yet, which means she's about 15 minutes from a breakdown. Patricia turned back toward the kitchen. The ice goes in the big red cooler on the patio, and tell your daughter the cake isn't ready yet. She'll figure out where I keep the sprinkles if I don't warn you. Ethan almost asked how Patricia knew Lily was already loose in the house, then decided it wasn't worth the question. Patricia Hayes had a particular radar for small children operating unsupervised. She had raised 3 kids and had been a middle school teacher for 20 years. There was no version of Lily's sneakiness that would get past her. He carried the ice through the house and pushed the back door open with his shoulder. The Hayes backyard was, as it usually was before a party, somewhere between organized and controlled disaster. Victoria's younger brother, Marcus, was supposed to be graduating today. Well, the party was today. The actual ceremony had been the weekend before, and their mother had decided that this meant the entire yard needed to be transformed into something that would have looked appropriate for a magazine spread, which meant that currently there were at least 4 separate decorating efforts happening with no coordination between them. Victoria was standing on the second rung of a stepladder near the back fence, holding a strand of white string lights above her head and squinting at a hook that was approximately 2 inches too high for her to reach without stretching dangerously. She was wearing jeans and an old gray t-shirt that Ethan was fairly sure had originally belonged to her college roommate and had been acquired through means that were never fully explained. Her hair was pulled back, but several pieces had already escaped. There was a small smear of something, tape adhesive, maybe, on her left forearm. "Don't," she said without turning around. "Don't what?" "Don't say anything about the ladder." "I wasn't going to say anything about the ladder." "You were thinking it." "I was thinking you could just move the hook down 2 inches. She turned her head to look at him over her shoulder. "I already put 3 screws in up here. I'm not moving the hook." "Then let me—" He set the ice bag down, walked over, and without making a whole event of it, simply took the end of the string lights from her hand, reached up past her, and looped it over the hook in one motion. There was a pause. "See?" he said. "No ladder discourse required." Victoria stepped down off the ladder and looked up at the lights. Then she looked at him. "You're 20 minutes late." "I stopped for ice." "I said 11. "I know you said 11. He picked up the ice bag again. "You always say a time that's 30 minutes earlier than you actually need people to be here. It's a system. It has never once worked." She opened her mouth, closed it, and then turned back toward the lights. "The cooler's by the table." "Patricia told me." He walked past her toward the patio. "Lily's in the house trying to find the sprinkles." "Oh no!" Victoria immediately turned. "Mom hides them on the second shelf of the She knows." Victoria stopped walking. "How does she know?" "Lily is extremely resourceful. We've talked about this." For a half second, the corner of Victoria's mouth pulled sideways in something that was almost a smile and wasn't quite. Then she went back to the string lights. Ethan put the ice in the cooler and looked around the yard. This was the part that he didn't examine too closely, the way he moved through this house. He knew where Patricia kept the extension cords because he had helped run them the year the outdoor speakers got set up. He knew the stepladder lived in the garage behind the lawnmower because he had borrowed it to clean the gutters after Victoria's father had thrown out his back, and no one else was going to do it. He knew the folding tables needed a washer under the left rear leg, or they rocked, because he had been the one who figured that out at Marcus's 16th birthday party and had been managing it every party since. He hadn't been asked to know these things. He just did. By noon, the yard had been transformed into something Patricia would probably describe as elegant, and that Marcus, when he arrived, would probably describe as embarrassing. There were white string lights along the fence line, a long table covered in a navy blue cloth, and someone, Ethan suspected Victoria, had talked their neighbor Mrs. Calloway into lending her portable speaker, which was now playing a playlist that was mostly 80s hits with occasional jazz selections that nobody had programmed and that appeared to be appearing on their own. Marcus arrived with 3 of his college friends, looked at the decorations, and said, with great feeling, "Mom." Patricia beamed. Victoria handed him a plate of food. Ethan watched this from the other side of the yard where he was finishing the last of the string light arrangement and felt, not for the first time, the particular sensation of being completely comfortable somewhere he had no technical claim to. The Hayes family had never made him feel like an outsider. Not once. From the very first time Victoria had dragged him here, their junior year of college, Thanksgiving, because his own family plans had fallen through, and she had simply said, "You're coming with me. Don't argue." Patricia had set a place for him without making a production of it. Her father, Richard, had handed him a beer and started talking about baseball like they'd had the conversation 100 times before. He had fit here in a way he couldn't fully account for. He had fit with Victoria in a way he had spent 6 years not looking at too directly. The relatives arrived in waves. First came Victoria's Aunt Sandra and Uncle Pete, who drove up from Richmond and could reliably be counted on to tell the same 3 stories about family vacations from the early 2000s. Then came the cousins, a sprawling collection of people ranging in age from 9 months to 63 years, who distributed themselves around the yard according to some invisible social logic that Ethan had never quite been able to decode. He found himself as he often did at Hayes' family events, moving between clusters of people with an ease that he would not have predicted from his own personality. He was not by nature a large group person. He didn't love parties. He preferred a conversation with 2 people to a conversation with 12. But here he relaxed in a way he didn't entirely understand. Lily had attached herself to Marcus's youngest cousin, a 6-year-old named Grace, who wore her hair in 2 high pigtails and appeared to share Lily's specific talent for finding the one thing at any gathering that the adults would prefer remain undiscovered. The 2 of them were currently crouched behind the azalea bushes near the fence, doing something that Ethan had decided he was better off not investigating unless someone started crying. "Your daughter," said Victoria, appearing next to him with 2 glasses of lemonade and handing him one, "has already recruited an accomplice. Grace seems like a willing participant." "Grace is 6. Lily is a criminal mastermind. That's not a fair partnership." Ethan looked over at the azaleas. "They're not hurting anything." "The last time Lily decided something wasn't hurting anything, we spent 40 minutes looking for my mother's reading glasses. To be fair, the fish tank was a creative hiding spot." "Ethan, I'm just saying." Victoria took a sip of her lemonade and looked out at the yard. The afternoon light was the particular soft gold that only happened in June, and the party had reached that comfortable middle point where everyone had eaten enough to relax and nobody had yet had enough to drink to get complicated. "It looks good," Ethan said. "The lights took forever." "You should have called me earlier. You would have told me to move the hook. And I would have been right." She turned her head to look at him sideways. This was a specific expression she had, a combination of mild exasperation and something warmer underneath that she never quite named. He had seen it approximately 3,000 times. He had never once done anything with the information it seemed to be offering. "Thank you," she said, "for coming early." "You said 11. "I said 11 because I knew you'd show up at 11:20. He considered this. "That's either very strategic or very manipulative." "Why can't it be both?" He laughed, short and real, and she looked away, but she was smiling when she did it. The afternoon moved the way good summer parties move, slowly, with no particular urgency, marked by small moments rather than large ones. Marcus gave a speech that was approximately 70% gratitude, 20% inside jokes that only his college friends understood, and 10% genuine emotion that he tried to cover with humor and mostly succeeded. Patricia cried twice and denied it both times. Richard Hayes, who was a man of very few public words, stood up at the end of Marcus's speech and just said, "We're proud of you, son." And somehow that landed harder than anything else. Ethan helped carry out the extra chairs when more relatives than expected appeared around 4 o'clock. He refilled the cooler with the second bag of ice. He found the extension cord when the speaker ran low on battery, and none of the immediate family could locate it because he knew it was in the same place it had been for 3 years, coiled behind the garden hose mount on the back wall. He did these things without being asked. He didn't think about why. It was Victoria's Aunt Sandra who started it. In retrospect, Ethan would be able to identify the exact moment, not because it was dramatic in its opening, but because of the way everything shifted afterward, like watching a single domino fall and understanding, before the second one moved, exactly where this was going to end. Sandra was sitting at the long table between Victoria and one of the older cousins, a woman named Deborah, who had driven up from Charlotte. The food had been cleared except for the cake, which Patricia had finally brought out to general celebration, and the gathering had settled into the comfortable sprawl of dessert conversation. "Victoria," Sandra said, reaching for her cake fork, "you have to tell me something." Victoria looked up. "What?" "When Ethan got here, where was the first place you went?" Victoria set down her fork. "I was in the backyard." "Mm-hmm." Sandra smiled the particular smile of a woman who was building towards something. "And where was he within about 3 minutes?" "In the backyard." Victoria's voice was carefully neutral. "He was helping with the string lights." "Right." Sandra turned to Patricia. "Patricia, how long do you think it took them to end up in the same place?" Patricia, who had a maternal sense for conversational danger and occasionally chose to ignore it entirely, said, "Oh, I'd say they found each other pretty quickly." "That's because they always do," Sandra said. Ethan, who was sitting 2 seats down and had been watching this exchange with the half attention he usually gave to conversations that didn't involve him, felt something shift in the air. He looked at Victoria. Victoria was looking at her cake. "I talk about Ethan," she said flatly. "That's not unusual. He's my best friend." "Honey," Deborah from Charlotte patted her hand. "Your mother told me what you said about his coffee order." Victoria went completely still. Patricia made a small, guilty sound. "I might have mentioned—" "Patricia." Victoria's voice came out measured, the way she talked when she was working very hard not to sound the way she actually felt. "What exactly did you mention?" "Well, just in conversation, that you always make sure they have his specific creamer at the office if he's coming by. And the thing with the jacket." Patricia paused. "And what thing with the jacket?" Deborah asked, fully committed now. "There's no thing with the jacket," Victoria said. "She keeps track of where it is," Patricia said, "because he leaves it places. She knows where it is." The table had gone the specific quiet of a group of people who are trying very hard to appear as though they are not paying attention while paying complete attention. "I notice things," Victoria said, very carefully, "about the people in my life. It's not—" She stopped. "It's not a thing." Aunt Sandra smiled warmly. "Does he know your coffee order?" A pause. Everyone looked at Ethan. Ethan suddenly became aware that he was being looked at. He also became aware, with sudden and uncomfortable clarity, that he did know Victoria's coffee order, had known it for years, and furthermore had, on at least 4 documented occasions, arrived somewhere she was going to be with her order already in hand because he'd driven past the coffee place on his way there anyway, which meant he said nothing, which was, as it turned out, an answer all by itself. Aunt Sandra made a small, satisfied sound and picked up her fork. "That doesn't mean—" Victoria started. "She calls me sometimes," Patricia said, and now her voice had a different quality, softer, almost fond, and that made it worse somehow. "Just to tell me things about him. Like if something happened at work that she thinks I'd find interesting, or if Lily does something funny at school that she heard about. She doesn't even realize she does it, I don't think." The table was absolutely silent. Victoria's face had gone from pale to a particular shade of red that Ethan had never seen on her before. Not during arguments, not during embarrassing stories, not during any of the hundreds of situations they had navigated together over 6 years. This was different. This was a woman who had just heard herself described from the outside for the first time and recognized the reflection. "Mom." Her voice was quiet, careful, the way she sounded right before something broke. "Can we—" "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't mean to—" "I'm just going to get some more—" Victoria pushed back from the table so quickly that her chair scraped a full 6 inches across the stone patio. She picked up her glass, which was already full, and walked into the house. The screen door swung shut behind her. Silence held the backyard for approximately 4 seconds. Then Marcus said, "So," and reached for more cake, and the table gradually, carefully, resumed conversation. Ethan sat still. He was not a man who moved quickly on emotional information. He was the type of person who received something significant and then needed to sit with it for a while before he understood what he was holding. This was a quality that had served him well in most areas of his life and caused him problems in others. Right now he was sitting with something that had the weight of 6 years in it. He thought about the coffee creamer at her office. He had noticed it once, just once, and had assumed it was a coincidence, an oversight from a previous meeting. He had never once considered that it might be consistent. He thought about the jacket. He did leave it places. He left it at the Hayes house, at his own apartment, occasionally at the diner they went to on Thursday mornings, once inexplicably in the parking garage of the building where she worked. And somehow, when he couldn't find it, a text from Victoria usually appeared within the same day. "Your jacket is at Mom's, by the way." She put it in the hall closet. He had never questioned it. He had accepted it the way he accepted all the small, specific ways Victoria fit around the edges of his life, as just how things were, as the natural order of a close friendship. But close friendship, a voice somewhere in the back of his head noted, did not usually make someone's face look the way Victoria's face had looked 30 seconds ago. That wasn't embarrassment at being caught doing something kind. That was something more specific, something more vulnerable. He looked at the back door. He looked at his cake. He looked at the back door again. Marcus, without looking up from his plate, said quietly, "She went to the living room, I think." Ethan nodded, stood up, carried his plate to the trash so he had somewhere to put his hands, and went inside. The house was cooler than the backyard and quieter in the particular way of rooms that have temporarily emptied out. He could hear the party through the glass, muffled voices, someone laughing, the music still playing from Mrs. Calloway's speaker. Victoria was not in the kitchen. She was not in the dining room. He found her in the living room, sitting on the wide arm of the couch, the way she had been sitting on furniture since college, always sideways on armrests, never in the middle of cushions the way the furniture was designed for, like she was perpetually ready to leave and hadn't fully committed to being in the room. She had set her glass on the coffee table. She was looking at the far wall where a collection of framed family photos had lived for at least 2 decades. She didn't turn when she heard him. "You don't have to come check on me," she said. "I know. I'm fine. I know." He sat down on the couch, in the middle, on the cushions, the way furniture was designed for, and looked at the same wall she was looking at. There was a photo of Victoria at maybe 14, standing in front of what looked like the Grand Canyon, squinting against the sun with the particular expression of an adolescent who is not going to admit they're having a good time. There was a photo of Marcus as a toddler in a bathtub. There was a family portrait from some Christmas in the late 90s where everyone was wearing matching sweaters, and Patricia Hayes was grinning with a ferocity that suggested she had waited years for this moment, and no one was going to ruin it. There was a photo, over to the right, that Ethan had looked at many times without really seeing. A cookout, summer, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. The whole family in the backyard. Everyone spread out and unposed the way candid photos happened. And in the edge of the frame, slightly cut off, were 2 people leaning against the back fence talking, completely unaware of the camera. Him and Victoria. He had never noticed it was him and Victoria before. "She didn't do it on purpose," Ethan said. "I know she didn't." Victoria's voice was even. "That makes it worse." He thought about that. "Because if she'd done it on purpose, you could be annoyed at her." "Yes." A pause. "And instead, I'm just—" She stopped. The sentence sat unfinished between them. "Victoria, don't." Her jaw tightened slightly. Not angry, bracing. There was a difference. "I'm not— I know what you're going to say." "You don't." He turned his head to look at her profile. "I don't even know what I'm going to say yet." She looked at him then, and there was something in her expression that he had seen fragments of over the years, in the edges of conversations that got cut off, in the particular pause before she laughed something away, but had never seen fully assembled. All at once, pointed directly at him. It was fear, not of him. Of what she'd already said without saying it, of the thing that was sitting in this room between them, having apparently been in this room for a very long time before either of them acknowledged it. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear that," he said carefully. "Out there. Nothing was said out there. Your mother said—" "My mother talks. Victoria." His voice was quiet, not pressing, just landing. "She said you call her about me, that you tell her things about Lily, about what's happening with me, that you just—" He paused. "That you do it without realizing it." The color was still in her face. She looked away. "I talk about my friends," she said. "It's normal." "Does she know what Marcus's best friend from college orders at coffee?" Silence. "Does she know what your VP of operations has for lunch every day?" Victoria said nothing. "Because I know," Ethan said, "what you order at every single coffee place in a 6-block radius of your office. I know you eat lunch at your desk on Tuesdays because that's when your calendar is the most ridiculous and you don't leave yourself time. I know you keep an emergency sweater in the 3rd drawer of your filing cabinet because your office runs cold and you never want to be the person who admits they're cold." He stopped. His voice had gotten a little rough in a way he hadn't planned. "I know those things because I pay attention to you. That's not normal. That's not how I am with most people." The room was very quiet. Victoria was looking at the middle distance, at some point between them and the wall, and her expression had changed in a way that was difficult to name. Something had opened in it, something that looked like relief and terror wearing the same face. "How long?" she said finally. The question was quiet, almost steady. I don't know, he said honestly. That's the thing. I've been trying to figure that out for the last 10 minutes, and I think the answer is, I don't know when it started because it didn't start. It just, he exhaled. It's been there. She turned to look at him directly for the first time since he'd sat down. Her eyes were dry. She wasn't a woman who cried easily. He knew this. She processed things inward first and outward later, usually alone, usually at night, and never in front of people if she could help it. The fact that she had walked out of that party was significant. The fact that she was sitting here with him now, her composure only slightly frayed at the edges, meant she was trusting him with something she hadn't handed anyone. I should have said something years ago, she said. Why didn't you? She looked at him like the answer was obvious. Because you're the person I tell everything to. If it went wrong, she stopped, looked at her hands. You're not replaceable, Ethan. I didn't know how to risk you. He sat with that. He understood it completely. He had not articulated it to himself, not in those terms, but he understood it with the instant recognition of someone who had been doing the same calculation without knowing what he was calculating. Every time he had gotten close to looking at his feelings directly, there had been a wall, a sensible, rational wall. This is your best friend? Don't be an idiot. You have a daughter to think about. The friendship is worth more. It's not worth the risk. And he had accepted the wall, had been grateful for the wall even, because on the other side of the wall was something that required actual courage. Lily loves you, Ben, he said. It wasn't what he'd planned to say. It came out before the planned version. Victoria blinked. She asks about you, he said. On days when you're not around, she just works you into the conversation somehow. Is Miss Victoria coming for dinner? Did Miss Victoria see that thing on TV? Like you're just, he shook his head, like you're just expected to be there. Something shifted in Victoria's face. The fear didn't disappear, but it moved, made room for something else. I know, she said quietly. I know she does. I've spent 6 years watching you with her, Ethan said, and telling myself that was a separate thing, that it was just you being a good friend, being good with kids. He paused. But it's not separate. Nothing about you is separate from anything else. He stopped, started again. I don't actually know how to talk about you in pieces. You're just all of it. The room was very quiet. Outside, through the glass door at the far end of the house, they could hear the muffled sounds of the party continuing. A burst of laughter, the music turning over to something new, someone calling out to someone else across the yard. Victoria had not looked away. 6 years is a long time, she said. Yeah. We've wasted a lot of it. Yeah. He exhaled. I know. A pause that stretched until it wasn't uncomfortable, just full. I'm not good at this, she said finally. Not apologetic, factual. I'm better at running a company than I am at... She gestured vaguely at the space between them. This. I'm a single dad who forgets to eat lunch half the time and still hasn't figured out how his own dishwasher fully works, he said. I'm not exactly a benchmark for having things together. She laughed. Short, genuine, and then she pressed her lips together like she was surprised by it. The dishwasher thing is fixable, she said. I've looked at it. I know you've looked at it. You sent me a video. You didn't watch the video. I watched the first 40 seconds. It was a 90-second video. I got the general idea. She was fully smiling now. The unguarded one. The one that she didn't produce for professional meetings or public appearances. The one that showed the slight unevenness of her teeth on the left side that she had been self-conscious about in college until she eventually stopped caring. The one Ethan had a specific and unreasonable fondness for. He was looking at her, and she was looking at him. And the thing that had been sitting in the room for the last 20 minutes, the thing that had probably been sitting in various rooms between them for the better part of 6 years, finally stopped pretending to be something manageable. Okay, he said. Okay, she repeated. What does that mean? I don't know yet. I think it means... He reached over and picked up her hand from where it had been resting on the couch cushion. Just held it. Didn't make a speech about it. Her hand was warm. She didn't pull away. Outside, the party went on without them. Someone had turned up the music. Someone was laughing the kind of laugh that carried over other sounds and pulled other people into it. Lily's voice appeared briefly among the noise, bright and emphatic about something, and then disappeared back into the blur of the afternoon. Neither of them moved to go back out. Not yet. The living room held the long gold light of a June afternoon, the kind that settles into everything and makes time feel different, slower and more significant than it usually is. The photo on the wall, the two of them caught at the edge of some past summer afternoon, didn't look like a coincidence anymore. It hadn't been a coincidence. It had been a preview. And for the first time in 6 years, neither of them looked away from it. Victoria's hand was still in his when they heard Lily's voice cut through the back of the house. Loud, specific, and carrying the particular urgency of a 7-year-old who has just discovered something that needs immediate adult attention. "Dad! Dad!" Grace spilled the lemonade on the tablecloth and she's crying and nobody's coming. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Victoria laughed, quiet, involuntary, the kind that escapes before you can decide whether it's appropriate. She pulled her hand back and pressed it against her mouth. "Go," she said. "I'm not done. The tablecloth is probably my mom's good one." She stood up, smoothing the front of her jeans with the automatic composure of someone who had been managing herself in front of other people for a long time. "Go help Grace. I'll be out in a minute." He looked at her for a moment. There was something unfinished in the room. Not unresolved exactly, but not fully sealed either, like a sentence that had reached its period but still had implications trailing behind it that neither of them had sorted through yet. "Okay," he said. He went to find Lily. Victoria stood in the living room for another 30 seconds after he left, looking at the wall. At the photo she had noticed him noticing. She had put that photo there herself 4 years ago when her mother had printed a batch from an old phone and handed them over in a paper bag and said, "Do something with these before I throw them out." She had placed it on the right side of the arrangement, partially behind a larger frame, where it wasn't the first thing anyone saw. She had never asked herself why she'd kept it. She was asking now. She took a breath, straightened her shirt, and walked back out to the party. The tablecloth was, in fact, her mother's good one. The lemonade had spread across the corner nearest the dessert plates in a pale yellow stain that Grace was staring at with the wide-eyed catastrophic guilt of a 6-year-old who has just broken something adult and is calculating whether she will survive the consequences. Lily was standing next to her with an expression of absolute loyalty, the kind children have before they learn that solidarity has political costs. Ethan was already there with paper towels, crouching down to Grace's level. "Hey," he said. "You okay?" Grace nodded rapidly, in the way that meant she was not okay. "It's just lemonade," he said. "Lemonade comes out. You're not in trouble." "It's a white tablecloth," Grace said miserably. "I know, but it's not your fault. Somebody put the pitcher too close to the edge. That's on the grown-ups." Victoria watched him from the edge of the patio, the ease of it, the way he didn't make Grace feel small or clumsy, just handled it, moved through it. She had watched him parent Lily for years, and it always did something to her she didn't fully name. The specific combination of gentleness and matter-of-factness he brought to it. He wasn't performing. He was just a man who knew how to be present with a scared kid, and it never looked like effort. Patricia appeared with a damp cloth and the confidence of someone who had outlasted worse stains. "Oh, this is nothing," she announced, and descended on the tablecloth with the focused energy of a woman who had raised 3 children in this house and had a story behind every mark on every surface in it. The crisis dissolved. Grace sniffled once and then accepted a piece of cake from Marcus, who had appeared with the instincts of a younger sibling who knows when distraction is called for. Lily, finding the emergency resolved without her further input, went back to the azalea bushes and whatever project she and Grace had been pursuing there before the lemonade incident. Victoria started folding the extra napkins someone had left stacked on the food table because her hands needed something to do. She did not look up when Ethan came to stand next to her. She could just sense where he was in a yard. She had not previously cataloged this as a notable quality until approximately 20 minutes ago. "Tablecloth is fine," he said. "Mom will soak it tonight and it'll be gone by morning," Victoria said. "She has a system. She has a system for everything. She really does." A pause. Neither of them said what was under the words. Across the yard, Aunt Sandra was telling a story to Deborah and two of the cousins. And it was clearly a good one because all four of them were leaning in. Richard Hayes had settled into the conversation with his brother-in-law Pete with the unhurried ease of two men who had been having the same conversation at family gatherings for 30 years and had made peace with enjoying it. Marcus was on his phone, though he kept looking up at his family with an expression that, when he thought no one was watching, was genuinely moved. It was a good afternoon, the kind that stayed with people. Victoria finished folding the napkins. "I said it wrong," she said quietly. "In there. I made it sound like—" She stopped, reconsidered. "I made it sound like I'd been just sitting on something for years, like I was waiting." Ethan looked at her sideways. "Weren't you?" "That's not—" She exhaled. "I wasn't waiting for you to figure it out and come fix it. I wasn't—" She pressed her lips together. "I built a life. I built a company. I made decisions. I was fine. I know you were fine. I don't want you to think I've been—" She gestured vaguely, pining, or whatever the word is. "I don't think that. It's just that you were there," she said, "and everything was easier with you there, and at some point I stopped being able to tell the difference between—" She looked for the words. "Between wanting you around and needing you around. And those are different things. And I didn't want to make it your problem." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's not a problem." "You know what I mean." "I do. And it's still not a problem." He picked up one of the napkins she'd already folded and refolded it slightly differently, then set it back. "I spent 3 years going on dates with women who were objectively great. Good people. Interesting. Nothing wrong with them." Victoria didn't say anything. She was very still in the way that meant she was listening carefully. "And every single time," he said, "there was this thing, this comparison. I couldn't turn it off. It wasn't even about you specifically most of the time, or I told myself it wasn't. It was more like—" He paused, trying to get the words right. "I kept measuring the distance between how I felt being with someone and how I felt being with you, and it never—" He shook his head. "It never closed." "Ethan." "What?" "You couldn't have told me this before I launched a company." The line was so unexpected that he laughed, sharp and genuine, and she smiled at the side of her mouth, still not looking at him. "The timing," she said, "has been genuinely terrible. We both live complicated lives. That's a generous framing." She finally looked at him. "You have a daughter. I have a company that needs me at 6 in the morning half the time. My life is not tidy, and yours definitely isn't. I'm not asking for tidy." "I know." Her voice got quieter. "That's the part I keep coming back to." The afternoon moved around them. Somewhere behind the azaleas, Lily and Grace had apparently struck an agreement that required them to relocate their project to the porch, because both small figures appeared briefly and then disappeared through the side gate. Patricia laughed at something Sandra said. The music changed again, something slower, with a guitar line that someone had clearly added to the playlist on purpose, and that felt like a very deliberate mood choice. "We should go back," Victoria said. She didn't move. "Probably. They're all going to look at us." "They were already looking at us." "Now they'll look at us and know they were right," she said. "Which is different. My Aunt Sandra is going to be insufferable. Sandra's going to be delighted. Which is the same thing as insufferable in her case. But there was no edge in it. The conversation had settled into something more like its normal register. The back and forth of people who had been talking to each other long enough that the rhythm was automatic. The difference was what was underneath it now, which was not nothing. "Lily's going to have questions," Victoria said. "Eventually." "Eventually, yeah. She asks questions like she's running an investigation." "Where do you think she learned that?" Victoria looked at him. "I ask reasonable questions. You asked my landlord about the load-bearing walls before I even moved in. That's practical. You weren't even there. You called him. The building is from 1974, Ethan." "Victoria." She almost smiled. "Fine. I ask a lot of questions." A pause. "Lily is going to want to know what things mean, what changes, what stays the same." "I know." His voice was careful. "I've thought about that. Not, he shifted. Not in the context of you specifically, just in general. Anytime my life changes, I think about what it means for her. That's because you're a good dad. I'm an okay dad. You're a good dad. She said it without hesitation, without softening it. Don't do the thing where you minimize that. He was quiet. I mean it, she said. I know you do. He looked at the yard, at Lily appearing again through the gate, now carrying something that appeared to be a stick she'd decorated with an azalea flower wedged near the top. She's going to be fine with whatever happens. He paused. She already loves you. You know that. I know that, Victoria said softly. The weight of it sat between them for a moment. Not heavy exactly. More like significant. The kind of significant that feels appropriate to the size of what it is. What do we do? Victoria asked. Practical. Because under all of it, she was a practical person. She had always needed the next action item, the plan, the concrete shape of things. Feelings without structure made her nervous. She was working on this and had been for several years and was approximately 40% successful on a good day. I don't know, Ethan said, and then, but I'm not pretending I don't know why I drove here today. She looked at him. I drove here because you texted me, he said, and I always drive wherever you text me, and I think, he stopped, started again. I think I've known for a while that that's not the behavior of someone who thinks of you as just a friend. I just kept using the word friend because it was the right size to fit over the whole thing without anyone getting alarmed. Victoria held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked away, out at the yard, at her family gathered in the June afternoon, at the string lights that were now barely visible against the bright sky, but would come on golden when the evening fell. We've wasted a lot of years, she said again. Not bitter, just honest. Some of them weren't waste, he said. We needed to be who we are. You needed to build the company. I needed to... He glanced at Lily, who was now presenting her decorated stick to Grace with the solemnity of a ceremony. I needed to figure out how to be her dad without completely losing myself in the process. You didn't lose yourself. Close a couple times. She didn't argue with that because she had been there for the close times. She had been the one he called at 11:30 at night in the second year, after Lily's mother had moved across the country and left Lily's care entirely to him, and everything had crashed down at once, and he hadn't known how to hold all of it. Victoria had listened for 2 hours. She had come over the next morning with food and stayed until he was functional again. She had not made a big thing of it, not then and not later, but she had also not forgotten it, and neither had he. Some of what they were stood on the foundation of nights like that one. I know things were hard, she said. Not a concession, just an acknowledgement. I know it's been a lot. It's been good too. He meant it. More good than bad. He smiled in the way he did when it was about Lily, involuntary, slightly helpless. She's the best thing I ever stumbled into, even when she's decorating sticks with flowers and recruiting 6-year-olds into her schemes. Victoria was watching Lily too. The smile on her face was the unguarded kind again. She told me once, Victoria said quietly, that she thought our Thursday morning breakfasts were the best part of the week. Ethan turned to look at her. I asked her once what her favorite thing was, Victoria said. This was maybe 6 months ago. She listed a few things, gymnastics class, her teacher, some cartoon, and then she said Thursday breakfasts, with me and you. A pause. She said it like it was obvious, like it didn't need explanation. He didn't say anything for a moment. His throat did something complicated. She didn't tell me that, he said. I know. I think she thought you already knew. The light had shifted, barely, just enough to tell that late afternoon was beginning its slow lean toward evening. The party had reached the comfortable plateau of its later hours. The food was mostly gone. The cousins had rearranged into smaller clusters. Richard Hayes had pulled out a guitar from somewhere. Ethan hadn't known he played or had forgotten, and was picking through something quiet near the porch steps, not performing exactly, just filling the air with something. Ethan watched him for a moment. Then he said, We should go back before Sandra decides to come find us. Sandra absolutely knows where we are. That's worse. She's enjoying it, Victoria agreed. She'll bring it up at Thanksgiving. She'll bring it up at every Thanksgiving for the next decade. Your family is relentless. My family is very invested in my personal life. A pause. They like you. I like them. She looked at him sideways. I know. Something in her voice, not quite soft, not soft. You've always liked them. You fit here. He held her gaze. Yeah, he said. I know. The word here sat in the sentence with more weight than it technically needed to carry. Both of them noticed. Neither of them moved to lighten it. They walked back into the yard together. Not holding hands, not announcing anything, just walking side by side the way they always had. The difference, the thing that had shifted in the house, in the quiet of that living room with its old photos and filtered afternoon light, wasn't visible exactly. It was internal. The shift of two people who have finally stopped pretending they don't know what they are. Sandra looked up when they came through the back door. Her expression was the specific, contained satisfaction of a woman who has spent 63 years being right about people and has learned to savor it quietly. She said nothing. She simply raised her lemonade glass a fraction of an inch in a gesture that could have meant anything and clearly meant something specific. Victoria looked at the sky. Ethan picked up a plate. Across the yard, Richard Hayes found a chord he was looking for and settled into it, and the melody moved through the party like an afterthought, something you didn't quite hear until you stopped talking. Marcus materialized at Ethan's elbow with the practiced timing of a younger sibling who has been running observation ops all afternoon. So, he said, in a tone of complete innocence that didn't survive contact with his expression. Don't, Ethan said. I didn't say anything. You were going to. I was going to ask if you wanted more potato salad. Marcus held out the bowl. But sure, read into it. Ethan took the potato salad. Marcus grinned and wandered away. Patricia, who had appeared from the direction of the kitchen carrying a new pitcher, stopped beside Victoria for just a moment, long enough to squeeze her daughter's arm once, briefly, without making a production of it. Victoria looked at her. Patricia looked back. Some entire conversation happened in the space of that look, the way conversations do between people who have known each other long enough to have shorthand for everything. Then Patricia went to refill the lemonade, and that was that. The evening started to come in slowly, the way it did in June, gently, without urgency, the sky going from blue to something deeper at the edges before you quite noticed it happening. Richard's guitar had drawn two of the cousins over to listen. Grace had fallen asleep in one of the lawn chairs in the boneless way of small children at the end of a long day. Lily was sitting on the porch steps, eating the last piece of cake, with the focused satisfaction of someone who has accomplished several personal goals before sundown. Ethan sat in one of the yard chairs. Victoria sat in the one next to him, not touching, just close, the way they had always sat, the way they would sit differently now, because they were different now. Even if from the outside nothing had visibly changed. Under the table, the edge of her chair was touching the edge of his. Just barely. She didn't move it. He didn't move his. The string lights came on when the automatic timer hit, soft and white against the darkening sky. And someone made an approving sound, and the party folded itself into evening without any ceremony, the way the best parties did. Aunt Sandra said, from across the yard to no one in particular, "Beautiful night." She was looking at the lights when she said it, or she was looking in that general direction. It was difficult to say for certain. Victoria looked at the table. She was not quite smiling, but the line of her jaw had something in it, something eased. Next to her, Ethan leaned back in the chair and looked up at the lights, and let the evening settle over him the way it was settling over everything, slowly, warmly, without asking anything of him except to be present in it. He was present. For the first time in a long time, he was fully, completely, without reservation present in the specific place he was, with the specific people around him, and with the specific knowledge that the thing he had been most afraid to examine closely was not, in fact, something to be afraid of. It was just true. And it had been true for a while. And somehow, that was the least frightening thing he had found out all day. The drive home took longer than 22 minutes because Lily fell asleep in the back seat before they even reached the highway on-ramp, and Ethan found himself driving the way he always drove with a sleeping child in the car, slower than necessary, taking the turns with more care than the road required, keeping the radio off. The neighborhood was quiet when he pulled into the parking lot of his building. He sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to Lily breathe in the back seat. She had her head tilted against the window, her decorated stick still clutched loosely in one hand. She had refused to leave it at the Hayes house, had carried it to the car with the solemn determination of someone transporting something of value. He got out, opened the back door, and lifted her without waking her. She was getting heavy. He noticed this every few months, the gradual accumulation of weight that reminded him she was not in fact going to stay 7 years old. He carried her upstairs, got her shoes off, and her into bed without fully waking her, and stood in the doorway of her room for a moment in the dark. The apartment was quiet in the specific way that apartments were quiet after an afternoon that had been full of other people. It wasn't an unpleasant quiet. It was the kind that made you aware of your own thoughts because there was nothing competing with them. Ethan went to the kitchen, drank a glass of water standing at the sink, and looked out the window at the parking lot below. His phone was on the counter. He looked at it for a moment, then picked it up and opened his messages. Victoria had texted at some point during the drive. He hadn't heard it come in. Aunt Sandra asked if you were coming to the 4th of July thing. He stared at this for a moment. She asked about me specifically. The response came back in under a minute, which told him she was also sitting somewhere quiet with her phone in her hand. She said, and I quote, "That boy better be at the 4th of July. So yes, specifically. Tell her I'll be there." A pause. Then, she's going to read everything into that. She already reads everything into everything. Doesn't matter. Another pause. Longer this time. "You okay?" Victoria wrote. He considered the question with more seriousness than it probably required on the surface. Was he okay? He was something. Not unsettled exactly. More like rearranged. Like someone had come in and moved the furniture in a room he knew well, and everything was still there. Nothing was missing, but the whole spatial logic of it was different, and he needed to walk through it a few times before it stopped surprising him. "Yeah," he wrote. "You?" "Talking to my mom. How's that going?" She keeps saying I didn't mean to, with a tone that suggests she meant to a little bit. He smiled at the phone. "How much did you tell her?" "She didn't need me to tell her anything. She's been my mother for 30 years. "Fair." He set the phone down and looked at the window again. The parking lot was orange under the streetlights. A car pulled in and a man got out and went into the building next door. The ordinary world continued its ordinary operation, indifferent to the fact that Ethan Brooks had spent an afternoon having the 6-year conversation he'd been avoiding for 6 years. He picked the phone back up. "For the record," he typed, "I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and pretend today didn't happen." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "I know," she wrote finally. "I'm not either." Okay. He put the phone on the charger and went to bed. He did not fall asleep for a while, which was unusual for him. He was generally a man who could sleep through most things, a skill he had developed in the early years of single parenthood when sleep was not a luxury he could afford to be precious about. But he lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and let his mind do what it was going to do, which was go back through the last 6 years and reframe things. This was uncomfortable in the way that most honest accounting was uncomfortable. Not terrible, just clarifying, in a way that required him to admit some things he'd been vague about on purpose. He had known, not the whole shape of it, not in a way he could have articulated in the middle of any given ordinary Tuesday, but underneath the daily texture of their friendship, at some level below the one where he kept his conscious decisions, he had known. And he had made a choice, repeatedly, to not press on it, to treat the whole thing as untouchable because it was too important to risk. The problem with that logic, and he could see it clearly now, at 11:30 on a June night with the ceiling fan turning slowly above him, was that it assumed the best outcome was maintaining what they had. It assumed that the friendship, preserved intact, was the maximum possible good. And it had taken Patricia Hayes accidentally saying the quiet part loud at a graduation party for him to recognize that he had been optimizing for the wrong thing. He wasn't angry at himself about it. He was something more tired than angry. The specific tiredness of realizing you've been working hard to avoid something that wasn't actually the thing you needed to avoid. He fell asleep eventually. He dreamed about nothing he could remember when he woke up. The morning was ordinary. Lily was up before him, which was usual, and had made herself cereal with slightly too much milk, which was also usual, and had placed her decorated stick from the party on the kitchen table with the flowers now wilted but still wedged in place, which was a new development but somehow felt consistent with her overall operational philosophy. "It's a wand," she announced when he came into the kitchen. "Okay. I'm going to put more flowers on it." "We don't have flowers." "I know. I'm going to get some." "From where?" She looked at him with the expression of someone for whom this was a deeply unnecessary question. "From outside." "From whose yard outside?" "I'll ask." He poured coffee. "You'll ask before you take anything." "I know, Dad." I know." She was eating cereal and reading the back of the box simultaneously, a feat of childhood multitasking that he had never quite managed to photograph but had tried several times. "Is Miss Victoria coming today?" The question landed with more weight than it was intended to carry. He poured creamer into his coffee and set the carton back. "Not today." "When?" "Lily." "I'm just asking." "Thursday breakfast is Thursday." "That's not for 5 days." She said this with the particular tragic calculation of a child for whom 5 days was a nearly geological span of time. "It is Thursday in 5 days, yes." "Can she come before that?" He looked at his daughter, who was looking at her cereal with the studied casualness of someone trying not to seem like they care about the answer. "Maybe," he said. Lily processed this. "Okay," she said, and went back to the cereal box. He drank his coffee and looked out the kitchen window at the Sunday morning outside and thought about how children had a way of making the complicated simple, not by resolving it, but by just moving through it as if it were obvious. Of course Miss Victoria should come. Why would she not come? The reasoning was not complex when you were 7. He thought about what Victoria had said, about Lily naming Thursday breakfast as one of her favorite things. He hadn't known. He had assumed Lily liked them the way kids liked routines, for the comfort of repetition. He hadn't known she had consciously identified them as significant, as a specific named good thing in her week. He pulled out his phone. It was early enough that he expected no response, but he wrote anyway. Lily asked when you were coming over. Then he put the phone down and made Lily's toast because she always forgot to eat the toast she asked for, and they did the Sunday morning the way they always did. Slow and without particular agenda, Lily talking continuously about things that required no specific response, Ethan drinking too much coffee and pretending to read the news on his phone while actually listening to her, the apartment filling with the ordinary noise of the two of them existing in the same space. Victoria responded around 9:30. "Tell her soon. Is Tuesday too short notice?" He looked at this. Then he typed back, "I'll check my impossible schedule. Your schedule is 3 client meetings and a school pickup. You know my schedule? You sent it to me last week, so I'd know not to call during the Hendricks meeting." He had done that. He had, in fact, done that. He had forwarded his weekly calendar to Victoria at some point so many months ago that the habit had become invisible. "Tuesday works," he wrote. The thing was, nothing about Tuesday was different from any other Tuesday. They had had dinners on Tuesdays before. They had had dinners and breakfasts and random afternoon drop-bys and crisis phone calls and 100 other unremarkable contacts that somehow collectively constituted a significant percentage of his functional adult life. Victoria's presence in his week was not new. The difference was that now he knew why it mattered as much as it did, and knowing changed the texture of things, even when the things themselves stayed the same. Tuesday arrived the way weekdays arrived when you had a 7-year-old, with more logistics than you'd planned for. Lily had a gymnastics practice that ran late because the girl ahead of her in the floor rotation fell off the beam and everyone had to stop and reorganize. By the time Ethan got her home, fed and out of the car, it was 20 minutes past when he'd told Victoria to come. He texted her from the parking lot, running late, keys under the mat, which was not something you told a colleague, or even most friends. It was something you told someone you trusted with the unremarkable interior of your actual life. The slightly messy apartment, the dish drying on the rack, whatever state the living room was in. Victoria let herself in with the key. This was not a new behavior. She had been using that key for 2 years after the winter he'd been sick and couldn't get downstairs, and she'd shown up with soup and had made a copy without mentioning it until 3 weeks later when she returned it along with a second spare she'd had made for herself. He had never asked for it back. She had never asked if she could keep it. The arrangement had simply continued in the way their arrangements tended to, by mutual unspoken consent. When Ethan and Lily came in, Victoria was sitting on the floor of the living room with Lily's craft supplies spread around her, and an expression of concentration that suggested she had been given a task with specific requirements. "She texted me," Victoria said without looking up. She was carefully attaching something to a piece of cardboard. "I texted her," Lily confirmed. "I told Miss Victoria about the wand project." Ethan looked at his daughter. "You have Miss Victoria's number?" "You put it in my tablet in case of emergencies." "Gymnastics running late is not an emergency." "I needed help with the cardboard part." He set down the bag he was carrying and looked at the project. Victoria had, apparently, been recruited into constructing something that appeared to be a base or stand for the decorated stick, using cardboard, hot glue from Lily's craft kit, and what looked like paint samples from a hardware store that had no obvious business being in the craft supplies, but that were, he supposed, Lily's color palette. "You're making a display stand," he said. "It's a wand stand," Lily corrected. "Miss Victoria said it needed structural support." He looked at Victoria, who met his eyes briefly with an expression of complete composure. "Structural integrity was a concern," she said. "For the wand." "For the wand stand." She held up the cardboard. "Hand me that piece there." He was fairly sure she was pointing at a paint sample labeled Morning Fog. He handed it to her. Lily sat down cross-legged across from Victoria and began explaining the color placement with the authority of someone directing a construction project. Ethan went to the kitchen and started putting together dinner. Nothing impressive, pasta and the jar sauce he kept in the back of the cupboard for nights when things ran long, with the addition of a can of tomatoes and some garlic, because making it entirely from jar sauce felt like a failure of minimal effort. From the kitchen, he could hear Lily's voice and beneath it, Victoria's. Quieter, occasional, asking questions, or offering a suggestion that Lily would either accept or reject with great confidence. There was a brief disagreement about whether the paint samples should go on the left or right side of the base. Victoria's position was left. Lily's position was that it didn't matter because wands don't have a left. This argument was not satisfactorily resolved in the 12 minutes it took Ethan to get the pasta on. He leaned in the kitchen doorway and watched them for a moment without them noticing. Victoria was not a woman who usually sat on floors. She had a particular physical composure in professional settings, excellent posture, precise movement, the controlled presence of someone who had learned early that how you held yourself communicated things before you spoke. He had watched her walk into board meetings and immediately owned the temperature of a room without raising her voice or making any obvious effort. It was a specific skill she had developed deliberately, she had told him once, because as a young woman in a room full of people who didn't automatically give her authority, she had needed to build it herself, piece by piece. On his living room floor with cardboard and paint samples and a 7-year-old explaining wand architecture, she looked like a different version of herself. Not less, just off-duty, relaxed in a way that didn't happen often, and that she seemed to only allow in specific places. His apartment was one of those places. He understood this now in a way he probably should have understood sooner. "The pasta is going to be about 10 minutes, he said. Lily looked up. "Is it the red kind?" "Yes." "With the bread?" "I forgot bread." "Dad," she said this with tremendous weariness. "There's crackers." "That's not the same." "Lily." "Okay." She looked back down at the wand stand. "Can we have ice cream after?" "We'll see." This was his standard answer to food-related negotiations, and Lily had learned long ago that it meant yes approximately 70% of the time, so she accepted it and returned to telling Victoria where to apply the hot glue. Ethan went back to the stove. He heard Victoria say, quietly enough that it wasn't meant to carry, "Your dad makes the best red sauce." And Lily saying, with complete authority, "He uses the jar kind, but he puts extra stuff in it." And Victoria laughing. That laugh, the one with the slight surprise in it. He turned the heat down on the pasta and stood at the stove and did not examine too carefully what it felt like to have that sound in his apartment on a Tuesday night. Dinner was the way dinner was when Lily was present. A combination of an actual meal and a continuous performance. She had recently developed the habit of turning everything into a game that required audience participation, and tonight she had decided that everyone had to name one true thing and one fake thing, and the other people had to guess which was which. Okay, she said, settling into her chair with the focus of a game show host. I'll go first. Ready? Ready, Victoria said. 1. I once found $1 in my shoe. 2. I can speak French. Found the dollar, Ethan said. Speak French, Victoria said. Lily pointed at Victoria. You win. I can't speak French. I know like 3 words. What 3 words? Victoria asked. Bonjour, croissant, and, she thought, chateau. Chateau's a good one. I learned it from a TV show. She pointed at Victoria. Your turn. Victoria considered this with more seriousness than the game technically required, which was one of the things Lily liked about her. She didn't do the adult thing of giving effortless game playing while clearly half checked out. She actually played. Okay, 1. I've never eaten a hot dog. 2. I once locked myself out of my car with it running. Car running, Ethan said. You've definitely eaten a hot dog, Lily said. Victoria pointed at Lily. Hot dog. I've never once eaten a hot dog. Lily stared. Never? Not once. But they're at baseball games. I know. And at the fair. I'm aware. That's kind of sad, Lily said with absolute sincerity. Victoria put her hand to her chest. Thank you, Lily. You should try one. Maybe. Dad can make them on the grill. We don't have a grill, Ethan said. We can get one. A grill is a significant purchase. Miss Victoria could bring one. They both looked at Lily. What? She said. How does that follow? Ethan asked. She has a balcony. She told me. Lily said this with the simple logic of someone who has identified a problem and its obvious solution. She can get a grill for the balcony, and then we can go there and make hot dogs, and I can teach her about them. Victoria was very carefully not looking at Ethan. Her expression was extremely controlled in the way that meant she was working to keep it that way. We'll think about it, Ethan said. That means yes, Lily told Victoria in a stage whisper. Lily, Ethan said. What? It does. He gave up. He ate his pasta. After dinner, Lily was granted her ice cream under the condition that she begin her bedtime process at a reasonable hour, which she agreed to with the confidence of someone who intended to define reasonable hour very loosely. She took her bowl to the living room to watch 30 minutes of the cartoon she was currently working through, and Ethan and Victoria stayed at the table. The apartment was quieter in the way it got when Lily was occupied elsewhere, still present, still full of her, but with the particular ease that settled in when she didn't need anything for a few minutes. Victoria turned her water glass in a slow circle on the table. She's really something, she said. She's a lot, he said. Not an argument, just the full version of the agreement. She asked me last month, Victoria said, if you were sad when you were alone. He looked up. What? She called me. The number in the tablet. Victoria looked at her glass. She said she had been thinking about it, and she wanted to know if you were sad when she was at school and you were at work by yourself. He was quiet for a moment. What did you tell her? I told her that you worked with people so you weren't alone, and that you seemed happy when you were with her. A pause. She said that wasn't the same thing as when you were really alone, like at night. He absorbed this slowly. His daughter, 7 years old, had called Victoria to ask whether he was lonely, the specific precision of a child who noticed things and took them seriously. She worries about you, Victoria said, gently, not pressing. I know she does. His voice came out rougher than he intended. I try to make sure she doesn't have to. You can't fully control what she worries about. She loves you. A pause. She also told me you were fine because you had me. Those were her words. He has Miss Victoria. He didn't say anything. I told her that was true, Victoria said. The cartoon played from the living room, music and dialogue that was cheerful and completely removed from the conversation happening at the kitchen table. The refrigerator hummed. The night outside the window was a deep blue. Ethan, her voice was quiet. I want to say something and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Okay. She took a breath. Not for effect. She actually needed a second, which told him this was something she had prepared but was still finding difficult. I've spent a long time being careful. With this. With you. Because I know your life is complicated, and I know you have Lily to think about, and I know that what you need isn't someone who makes things harder, and I'm not... She stopped. I'm not always easy. I know that. I keep weird hours and I get absorbed in work, and sometimes I go quiet for a few days when something is wrong because I haven't figured out how to ask for help without feeling like I'm failing at something. She looked at him. I'm not describing some ideal version of myself. I'm describing the actual version. I know the actual version, he said. I know you do. That's the point. She looked down at the glass. You know the actual version, and you're still here. And I spent a long time telling myself that was just what good friendships looked like. But I don't think that's all it is anymore, and I'm not sure it ever was. He waited. She had said, let me finish. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight, she said. I'm not asking you to map out what this looks like, or what we call it, or what the plan is. I'm just... She exhaled slowly. I'm saying that I'm in this, whatever in this means right now. I'm not going to disappear or pull back or convince myself it's safer to stay on the other side of the line. She met his eyes. I've been on the other side of that line for 6 years. I'm tired. He held her gaze. I'm tired too, he said. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was an ordinary sentence said at an ordinary kitchen table with the sound of a cartoon playing in the next room and a wand stand drying on the living room floor. It was the kind of moment that didn't look like much from the outside and meant everything from the inside. She nodded once, the tension in her shoulders, and he could see it. He had always been able to read her body the way you read a place you know well, released by a fraction. The grill thing, he said. She looked up. What? Lily's not wrong about the balcony. Victoria stared at him. Then she made a sound that was half exasperation and half laugh and covered her mouth with her hand. You cannot be serious. I'm just saying, it's a reasonable square footage. I'm not buying a grill. You could borrow one. From whom? Sandra seems like a person who has strong opinions about outdoor cooking. Absolutely not. Sandra would turn a grill purchase into a formal announcement. It doesn't have to be a grill. It could be one of the small ones. Ethan. What? Are we actually talking about grills? He considered. No, he said, but it was making you laugh. She looked at him for a moment with the full, undefended expression, the one he'd been watching from various distances for 6 years and was now allowing himself to look at directly. You do that, she said, when things get too much. You make a joke. You noticed. I noticed things about you. She said it plainly. No embarrassment now, the way there had been embarrassment at the party when her mother said it. That particular wound had been cleaned and closed. I have for a long time. I know, he said. I notice things about you too. I know you do. From the living room, Lily's voice came floating back. Dad, the episode's almost over. Okay, he called back. I want the next one. We said 30 minutes. I know, but it ended on a cliffhanger. Lily. A sound of profound suffering. Then, fine. Victoria was smiling at the table. Cliffhanger, she said quietly. The tragedy of serial animation, he said. She's been living with it for 2 years. That's a parenting challenge I did not anticipate. There's so many you don't see coming. He leaned back in his chair. Last month she informed me that her friend Kira said she needed to have a mom to have a real family. Victoria went still. She wasn't upset, he said quickly. She was just reporting it, the way she reports things. She said she thought about it and decided Kira was wrong, but she wanted to check with me. What did you tell her? I told her families looked a lot of different ways and ours was complete. A pause. How did she respond? She said, I know, Dad, in the tone she uses when she thinks I'm being obvious. He smiled, and then she asked for a snack. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then, she's going to be fine. I know. I mean it. She's a whole person, Ethan, already. She knows what she thinks. She really does. She gets that from somewhere. He looked at his hands. Her mom was like that too, when things were good. This was a territory they had traveled carefully over the years. Victoria knew the outline of it, the relationship that had been wrong for a long time before it ended, the departure, the adjustment period that had required all of him for several years. She had never pushed on it. She had let him bring it up when he needed to and stayed quiet when he didn't. "I'm not carrying it anymore," he said. "I want you to know that. I was, for a while. I was carrying a lot of it, but I'm not." "I know," she said. "I can tell." He looked at her. "How?" "You stopped apologizing for things that weren't your fault about 2 years ago." She said it simply. "You used to do this thing where you over-explained yourself, like you needed to prove you were credible before anyone would believe what you said. You don't do that anymore." He thought about this. "I didn't know I did that." "I know, that's what made it noticeable when it stopped." This was the thing about her. The specific thing that he had known was there and had been careful not to look at too directly. She paid attention to the long version of him. Not the version he presented in any given moment, but the version that accumulated over years. The changes he didn't track in himself because he was too close to see them. She had been watching the whole arc of him from close enough to see the detail. That was not friendship, or not only friendship. That was someone who had made him a priority in the private accounting of her attention. And he had done the same with her, without naming it. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas. She had apparently started the bedtime process without being told, which happened occasionally, and which Ethan always received with a level of private gratitude he tried not to make too visible, since drawing attention to it seemed to guarantee it wouldn't happen again. "I brushed my teeth," she announced. "Good. Can Miss Victoria tuck me in?" A pause. Ethan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Lily with an expression that had something careful in it. Not hesitation exactly, but the awareness of what the question meant. It wasn't the first time. She had done it before, on the occasions when Ethan was occupied or Lily had specifically requested her, and it had always felt natural in the way that didn't invite examination. Examining it now, Lily asking with the simplicity of someone who didn't see it as a complicated request, it felt like something the universe was making a point about. "Sure," Victoria said. "Go pick a book." Lily disappeared. Victoria stood up from the table. She paused at the kitchen doorway, turned back to look at him. "I'm going to be terrible at grilling," she said. He looked at her. "I'll teach you." She nodded once, like this was settled, and went down the hall. He stayed at the table. He heard Lily's voice from the bedroom, like eager and immediate, the way she got when she was showing someone something. He heard Victoria's quieter response. He couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of it, the back and forth. He sat in the kitchen with the remains of dinner on the table and the wand stand drying in the next room, and the night settled fully outside the window, and he let himself think, for the first time without cutting the thought short, about what a future looked like when it included all of this. Not as a question, as an actual thing to look at. It looked, he decided, more like his actual life than anything he had ever tried to imagine for himself. Which maybe meant it wasn't a coincidence. Maybe it meant it had been built, without either of them fully realizing they were building it, over 6 years of showing up. He got up and cleared the dinner plates and didn't make a big thing of the fact that his chest felt lighter than it had and longer than he could accurately measure. Down the hall, Victoria's voice had settled into the rhythm of reading aloud, and Lily's occasional interjections floated back through the apartment like small bright things, and the whole of it, the dishes in his hands, the water in the sink, the sound of the two of them in the next room, sat inside Ethan like something he didn't have an adequate word for. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, just his. Victoria left that Tuesday night at 10:15 after Lily had fallen asleep mid-chapter, and they'd both sat for a moment in the quiet of the bedroom doorway, looking at the small shape of her under the blanket before pulling the door halfway closed and walking back to the kitchen without saying anything, because nothing needed to be said. Ethan walked her to the door. They stood in the doorway the way they had stood in doorways 100 times over 6 years, the ordinary leaving at the end of an ordinary evening, except that it wasn't ordinary anymore, and they both knew it, and neither of them was pretending otherwise. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he agreed. She looked at him for a moment, not waiting for something, just looking, the way she had started letting herself look without immediately redirecting it. Then she said goodnight and went down the hall to the elevator, and he stood in the open doorway until he heard the elevator arrive and the doors close. He went back inside and finished cleaning up the kitchen. Thursday breakfast was at the diner on Clement Street that they had been going to for 4 years. A place with vinyl booth seats that had been repaired with electrical tape in at least 3 spots, a coffee that was genuinely excellent and served in mugs that did not match, and a breakfast menu that had not changed since the owner's mother had written it in 1987, and that the owner had no intention of updating because, as she had explained once to Ethan when he'd asked, if it's not broken, don't touch it, and this is definitely not broken. Lily always ordered the same thing, pancakes with the blueberries on the side, because she didn't like them cooked into the batter. A distinction she had explained to the waitress, Donna, so many times over the years that Donna now wrote it on the ticket automatically without being asked. This was, Lily had informed Ethan, the highest form of being irregular. They got there first. Victoria came in 7 minutes later, which was actually on time by the real standard. The stated time of 9 was aspirational, and she came through the door already unwinding her jacket with the distracted efficiency of someone whose morning had already had several things happen in it. She slid into the booth across from Lily and said, "Don't ask." "What happened?" Lily asked immediately. "There was a thing with the parking garage and then a thing with my email." Two things. Yes. Donna appeared with coffee and the unspoken understanding that Victoria's order was the same as always, black, 2 sugars, and that Ethan wanted a refill even though he'd only been here 7 minutes, which he did. "Better?" Ethan asked after Victoria had had a sip. "Getting there." She set the mug down. So the parking garage was a structural thing. One of the levels is closed for inspection, which means everyone is on the same 2 levels, and it's... She made a gesture that communicated the full geometry of the problem. "You could take the train," Lily suggested. Victoria looked at her. "The station is 6 blocks from my building." "That's not far." "In December it is." "It's June." "I'm thinking about December." Lily considered this. "That's like planning ahead." "That's exactly what it is." "My teacher says that's a good quality." "Your teacher is correct." Lily looked satisfied, the way she did when 2 adults independently confirmed something she already believed. She turned her attention to the laminated menu she had memorized 3 years ago and still consulted every week out of ritual rather than necessity. Ethan watched Victoria across the table. She was reading something on her phone, not urgently, just clearing whatever had accumulated in the 7 minutes between her car and the diner. Her coffee was in her left hand. There was a small crease between her eyebrows that appeared when she was reading something that required a decision. He had known that crease for years, had looked at it from across rooms and tables, and once from across a conference room during a meeting they'd both attended where he'd watched it appear while she was processing something the presenter said and had known, from the crease alone, that she disagreed but was deciding whether to say so. She had said so. She had been right. She looked up from her phone and caught him looking. "What?" she said. "Nothing." She looked at him for a moment with the expression that was not quite suspicious and not quite amused. Then she looked back at her phone. Lily, who missed very little, looked between them with the evaluative gaze of someone running an assessment. She said nothing. She went back to the menu. Breakfast arrived with the usual Donna efficiency. Lily's pancakes with blueberries on the side, Victoria's egg white omelet that she ordered because she actually liked it rather than for any virtuous reason, despite what people assumed, and Ethan's bacon and eggs, which he ordered every week and about which he had no complicated feelings whatsoever. The conversation moved the way it moved on Thursday mornings, without particular agenda, following Lily's lead most of the time, since Lily had a considerable volume of material to cover. She was currently in the middle of a complicated social situation at school involving 3 girls, a jump rope, and an argument about rules that had begun 2 weeks ago and showed no signs of resolution. Victoria listened to this with the specific attention she gave to things that mattered to Lily, which was complete and genuine and not performed. "Okay," Victoria said, when Lily finished the latest installment. "What do you think should happen?" "I think Maya should say sorry," Lily said, "because she changed the rules in the middle." "Did you tell her that?" "I told her the rules changed. But not that you thought she should apologize." Lily considered this. "No." "Why not?" "Because then she'd be mad at me." "She might be," Victoria said, "or she might not know you felt that way. People don't always know what they're supposed to apologize for unless someone tells them. Lily absorbed this with the serious expression she wore when she was genuinely processing something, rather than just waiting for the adult to finish. What if she gets mad anyway? Then you deal with that, but at least you said what you actually thought. A pause. Keeping it inside doesn't fix anything. It just makes it worse. Did that ever happen to you? Lily asked, not saying what you thought. Victoria's eyes moved briefly to Ethan. Just briefly, just a flicker, and then back to Lily. Yes, she said. For a pretty long time. What happened? It worked out. Eventually. Her voice was entirely steady. But it took longer than it needed to. Lily nodded with the gravity of someone filing this information for future use. Then she said, "Can I have the syrup?" And the conversation moved on, the way conversations did when Lily was steering them. Under the table, Victoria's foot touched his briefly. The most incidental contact, the kind that happened in booths. And she didn't move it, and neither did he. The next few weeks had a particular texture to them, not dramatic, not the sudden transformation of two people who had admitted things and were now conducting themselves entirely differently. It was more like a loosening. The gradual removal of a constraint that had been present so long they'd stopped feeling it as a constraint and had started feeling it as just the shape of things. He called her on a Tuesday night about nothing in particular. He hadn't done that before, called without a reason. He had always had a reason, even if the reason was thin. A question about something, a thing to tell her, an occasion. This time he called because he'd just put Lily to bed and the apartment was quiet and he wanted to hear her voice, and he called rather than constructing a justification for calling. She picked up on the second ring. "Everything okay?" was the first thing she said, because his unscheduled calls had historically been event-driven. "Yeah," he said. "Nothing's wrong. I just called." A pause. "Okay," she said, and her voice had something warm in it. "Hi." "Hi." They talked for an hour about nothing consequential, about a show she'd been watching, about a difficult client of his who kept moving deadlines and expecting the deliverables to stay the same, about a memory they had from their second year of knowing each other, a road trip that had gone badly wrong in a specific sequence of events involving a wrong turn, a closed bridge, and a diner that had only one thing on the menu that they could eat without getting sick, and they had eaten it 3 times in the same day and had both privately decided never to mention it again and were now, apparently, ready to find it funny. He went to sleep that night easier than he had in a while. She texted the next morning. "That story was worse than I remembered. The eggs were also worse than I remembered. I can't believe we ate them 3 times. We were very committed to the plan. We were idiots. We were 24. Same thing." He was smiling at his phone at 7:30 in the morning in his kitchen, and Lily came in and said, "Why are you smiling at your phone?" And he said, "No reason." And she said, "That's a reason. That's just not the one you're saying." And he poured her cereal and declined to pursue the conversation further. The harder moment came on a Friday in late June. Ethan had a friend, had known him since before Lily, since the years when he and Ethan had worked the same office and gone to the same after-work bar, and had the same general orientation toward a Friday night, which was to say uncomplicated. His name was Derek, and Derek was one of the few people from that era who had remained present through the various reorganizations of Ethan's life. Derek knew about Victoria the way people knew about a weather system that was always present on the horizon. He had absorbed years of Ethan's casual mentions, had met her 3 or 4 times at the edges of events, and had held a position on the subject of their friendship that he had expressed at various points, with varying degrees of directness. They met for a beer on a Friday evening while Lily was at a sleepover. Derek showed up at the bar with the comfortable ease of a man who had nowhere else he needed to be, and they got through 20 minutes of catch-up before Derek said, with no particular setup, "So what's happening with Victoria?" Not a question exactly, more like an opening. Ethan looked at his beer. "Things are different." Derek looked at him. "Different how?" "Different as in, we talked about some things." "What kinds of things?" "The things," Ethan said, and looked at Derek, and Derek held his gaze for a moment and then leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, finally. Don't. I've been watching you do this for 3 years. You've known about this for 3 years? Ethan. Derek set his glass down. Everybody who has ever seen the two of you in the same room for more than 20 minutes has known about this for years. The only two people who didn't know were you and her, and I'm not even sure that's true. I think you both knew and were just refusing. Ethan said nothing because there was nothing to argue with. How'd it come out? Derek asked. Her mother, at the graduation party. Derek made a sound of deep appreciation. Patricia Hayes, she always seemed like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. She said it wasn't on purpose. Of course she did. Derek. What? I'm just saying. That woman loves you. She's been loving you as a son-in-law in her head for years, I guarantee it. Ethan picked up his beer. You're projecting. I'm observing. Derek leaned forward. So what happens now? You're together? He stopped. This was the part that didn't have a clean word for it yet. We're not pretending anymore. What happens now is still figuring out. What does that mean in practice? It means I called her on a Tuesday for no reason. Derek stared at him. Then he said very deliberately, You called her on a Tuesday for no reason. Yes. Ethan, I say this with complete affection and as someone who has known you for a decade. That is not a difficult bar. I'm aware. You're aware. Derek shook his head. What is it about her that makes you... He gestured. This. He considered the question seriously, because Derek had known him long enough to deserve a serious answer. She doesn't let me be vague, he said finally, about myself. She asks the actual question, and then she waits for the actual answer, and she knows when the answer I'm giving isn't the real one. A pause. Most people accept the version of yourself you hand them. She never has. Derek was quiet for a moment. That sounds exhausting, he said. It's the opposite, Ethan said. When you stop performing for someone, you don't get tired the way you normally do. You just... He shook his head. You're just there. Derek looked at him for a long moment. Okay, he said. Yeah. He picked up his beer. Don't blow this one. I know. I mean it. I have watched you walk away from things because it was safer, and I need you to not do that here. I know, Derek. She's the real one. I know, Ethan said, quiet. I know she is. The complication arrived on a Wednesday 2 weeks later, in the form of a voicemail. He was picking Lily up from gymnastics when his phone buzzed with a notification he almost didn't look at. He had a policy about screens in the pickup line, partly because Lily's school had a thing about it, and partly because he had once watched a man in an SUV drive directly into the sign that said, Student Pickup Zone, while staring at his phone, and it had permanently reorganized his priorities. He looked at the voicemail notification in the parking lot after Lily was in the car. The name was Christine. He sat with that for a moment. Christine was Lily's mother. She lived in Portland now, had for 4 years, and communicated through a system of texts and scheduled monthly calls that had been established by a mediator in the second year after she left and had been maintained with varying degrees of consistency since. She did not typically leave voicemails. Voicemails from Christine had historically signaled a change of plan. He drove home first, got Lily settled with homework and a snack. Then he went to his bedroom and listened to the message. It was 3 minutes long. Christine's voice was the voice he remembered and no longer associated with any strong feeling. It had become simply her voice, recognizable and not particularly charged, the way the voices of people you've moved past eventually became. She said she was going to be in the city. A work conference. She'd been promoted, something in operations, she explained briefly. She would be there for 4 days in mid-July, and she wanted to see Lily. She said she hoped that was okay and that she'd understand if it wasn't on short notice, but she hoped he'd consider it. She also said, and this was the part he listened to twice, that she'd heard Lily was doing well and that she was glad. She said it sounded genuine. It probably was. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the wall. This was the part of his life that didn't simplify. He had made his peace with Christine's absence, with the way it had happened and the way Lily had adjusted, better than anyone had expected, which was both a relief and its own complicated thing, because what did it mean when a child adapted so completely to someone leaving? He had made his peace with raising Lily alone and with the slow, difficult work of rebuilding himself around that reality. He had not considered at least not recently, what it felt like when Christine came back into frame. Not back, just visible again. He texted Victoria, "Can you talk?" The response was immediate. "Give me 10 minutes, I'm finishing something." 12 minutes later, she called. He told her about the voicemail. She listened without interrupting, which was something she was good at. Better than she'd been when they were younger, when her instinct had been to start problem solving before all the information was in. She'd worked on it. She waited until he'd gotten through all of it. "What does Lily know?" Victoria asked. "Nothing yet. I want to figure out what I think first." "What do you think?" "I think—" He stopped. "Lily doesn't talk about her much, but she doesn't not think about her. She asked me once, about a year ago, why some moms left. Just dropped it into a regular evening like it was a casual question. She wasn't upset. She was just asking." "What did you tell her?" "That some parents weren't ready for the job when it came, and that it wasn't about whether they loved their kids. It was about whether they were in a place to show up." "How did she take it?" "She said okay and went back to her show." He exhaled. "She processes things privately, like you." A pause. "You think Christine should see her?" "I think Lily should get to know her mother isn't a closed door, even if it's complicated, even if it's—" He rubbed his face. "I don't want Lily to hit 15 and think I kept something from her because it was easier for me." "That's a good reason." "It's also terrifying." "I know." Victoria's voice was steady, not pretending it wasn't complicated. "How are you?" "I'm—" He considered telling her fine, which was the reflexive answer. "I'm okay. It's just, she's back in the picture, even just at the edge, and it reorganizes things. Not me and her. That's done, but..." He searched for the shape of it. "It's like running a calculation you thought was finished and finding out there's still a variable you hadn't accounted for." "Lily's the constant," Victoria said. "Everything else is the variable." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah. You're going to handle it well," she said, "because you always do, even when it costs you." He didn't respond to the compliment because he never knew how. She knew this. "You should call Christine back," Victoria said. "Not because it's easy, but because it's the right order of operations. Call her, figure out the actual shape of what she's asking, and then talk to Lily." "Yeah." He leaned back against the headboard. "I know. And Ethan." "What?" "Tell me how it goes, all of it, not just the resolved version after the fact." He understood what she was saying. He had a habit, she had identified this accurately about 2 years ago, of processing difficult things privately until they reached some kind of conclusion and then presenting people with the finished version. It was a protection mechanism dressed up as consideration, and she had called it out gently enough that he'd had to actually look at it. "Okay," he said. "I mean it. I know you do." He called Christine the following evening after Lily was asleep. The conversation was careful in the way conversations between people with a complicated history were careful. Both of them navigating around things without naming them. Both of them focused on the practical question of what seeing Lily would look like and how to make it as undisruptive as possible. Christine sounded different than he remembered. Quieter, less dint. He didn't know what to do with that and decided it wasn't his job to do anything with it. They agreed on a Saturday afternoon in the second week of July. A public place, Christine's suggestion, which he respected. 2 hours, with the understanding that it could be shorter if Lily needed it to be, and no pressure for longer. He told Lily the next morning at breakfast. He sat down across from her at the table, with her cereal in front of her and the morning coming in through the kitchen window, and said, "I have something to tell you. About your mom." Lily put her spoon down. She looked at him with an expression that was very careful and very still. In the way she went still when she was trying not to show she was scared. "She's okay," he said immediately. "Nothing's wrong. She's coming to the city for work and she wants to see you." Lily was quiet. "You don't have to," he said. "This is your choice." She looked at the table. Then she looked up. "Is she going to be here?" "In the city, for a few days." "I mean, is she—" Lily stopped, started again. "Is she going to try to take me somewhere?" His chest tightened. "No," he said. "You live here, with me. That doesn't change. She just wants to spend some time with you. A couple of hours. Lily looked at her cereal bowl. The morning was very quiet. Does Miss Victoria know? She asked. He blinked. I told her, yeah. What did she say? She said it was your choice. Lily nodded slowly. Okay. A pause. Can Miss Victoria come? To the thing? He hadn't expected that. He sat with it for a moment. That might be complicated. It might be better if it was just you and your mom. What if I don't want it to be just me and my mom? Lily, I'm not saying she has to come, I'm just asking. She was looking at him with the specific gaze she used when she was asking him to be honest rather than reassuring. What if I get scared? I'll be there, he said. I'm not leaving you alone. She considered this. Okay, she said, but I'm going to tell Miss Victoria what happens after. That's completely fine. And if it's bad, I want her to come over. We can arrange that. She picked her spoon back up. Okay, she said again. And then, Dad? Yeah. I know she left. Her voice was careful, not broken, just clear. I've known for a long time that she left. I'm not confused about it. I just didn't know if she was ever going to want to see me again. He held very still. And now you know she does. Yeah. She stirred her cereal. I don't know how I feel about that yet. You don't have to know yet. I know. A pause. It's okay. I just need to think about it. Take all the time you need. She nodded, ate a spoonful, and then said, Is there more milk? And he got up and got it, and the morning resumed its ordinary motion, and he managed to get all the way to the kitchen counter before his composure had to do any actual work. He texted Victoria from the counter, his back to Lily. Told her she's okay, processing. The response came in under a minute. How are you? He looked at the text. He thought about saying fine. He put the milk back in the refrigerator and typed, Less okay than she is, honestly. That makes sense. You've been carrying this longer. Yeah. I'm here. All of it, remember? Not just the resolved version. He looked at that for a moment, then he typed, I know, thank you. He put his phone in his pocket and went back to the table and sat across from his daughter, who was eating cereal and thinking about something she wasn't ready to say yet, and he was quiet with her in the way she needed, present without pressing, there without demanding that she be fine about it, which was the only way he knew to do this right. The July morning moved around them both, slow and ordinary and full of things that hadn't resolved yet, which was the actual texture of a life being lived, not a life being performed, and he had stopped expecting anything different. His phone buzzed once more in his pocket. He didn't look at it. He knew who it was, and he knew what it would say, and he knew it would be there when he was ready, which was the specific quality of a person who wasn't going anywhere. That was enough. For right now, in this kitchen, with his daughter thinking her careful thoughts across the table from him, that was more than enough. The Saturday in mid-July arrived the way consequential days sometimes did, unremarkably, with regular weather and regular noise and no particular sign that it was going to matter more than the days around it. The sky was overcast but not threatening. The coffee Ethan made that morning was slightly too strong because he'd measured without paying attention. Lily was quiet at breakfast in the way she'd been quietly preparing all week. Not withdrawn, not upset, just internal. Thinking. She had asked 3 questions in the days leading up to this, each one separated from the last by at least 24 hours, as if she'd processed one completely before allowing herself to form the next. The first was whether her mother had other kids. The second was whether she had to call her mom or if she could just use her name. The third, asked on Thursday night while Ethan was checking her homework, was whether Christine had always known where she lived. He had answered all 3 as honestly as he could, which meant some of the answers were incomplete, and he said so. Lily had accepted the incomplete ones with the same seriousness as the complete ones. They drove to the coffee place Christine had suggested, a neutral, public spot about 20 minutes from the apartment, the kind of place busy enough to feel safe and quiet enough to actually talk. Ethan had agreed to it because Christine had picked correctly, which told him she had thought about this more carefully than the late notice of the voicemail had suggested. Christine was already there when they arrived. She was sitting at a corner table near the window, her hands around a coffee cup, and she stood up when she saw them come through the door. She looked different in the way that 4 years changed people when those 4 years had involved some kind of reckoning. She was thinner than he remembered, and her hair was shorter, and she held herself with a caution that hadn't been there before. The particular caution of someone who knows they are not owed a welcome and is trying not to ask for more than they deserve. Lily stopped walking when she saw her. Ethan put his hand briefly on her shoulder, not pushing, just present. "You okay?" he said quietly. Lily nodded once. Then she walked forward. He stayed near the door. This was the agreement, the one he'd made with himself, that he would be in the room, visible, but that the space between Lily and Christine was theirs to figure out. He was not going to stand at the table and monitor. He was not going to make Christine feel surveilled. He was not going to make Lily feel like she needed to perform okayness for his benefit. He got a coffee he didn't particularly need and sat at a table 2 removed from theirs where he could see Lily's face without being directly in her line of sight. For the first 10 minutes, Lily sat with her hands in her lap and answered questions in the short, careful way she answered questions from adults she didn't fully trust yet. Not rude, just measured. Christine did most of the talking in the beginning, which Ethan suspected was intentional, filling the silence, giving Lily time to adjust, not demanding reciprocal openness before it was ready. He watched his daughter's posture change in increments. The first shift came around the 15-minute mark, when Lily apparently said something that made Christine laugh. A real one. Surprised. Brief. And Lily looked at her own hands and then looked back up with an expression that was still cautious, but had something else in it now. Curiosity, maybe. The particular kind that happens when someone turns out to be more three-dimensional than the space you'd filed them into. He looked out the window. He drank his coffee. He let them have it. His phone buzzed. Victoria. "How is it going?" He typed back. "Too early to tell." Lily was nervous at first. "Seems better. How are you doing?" He looked over at the table. Christine was showing Lily something on her phone. A photo, maybe, based on the angle. Lily leaned in slightly to look. "Okay," he typed. "Weirdly okay. That's not weird. You've done the hard work already. This is just what comes after." He thought about that for a moment. Then he wrote, "I keep waiting for it to feel more dramatic. Life is mostly not dramatic. You know this. You're pretty calm for someone who has run 3 company acquisitions. Those were dramatic. This is just a Saturday." He smiled at the phone. Donna from the Thursday diner would have approved of his composure, or at least found it unsurprising. The meeting ran an hour and 40 minutes, which was longer than the agreed 2 hours ceiling, but didn't feel like it had gone over. It had come to its own natural stopping point, the way conversations did when they'd covered what they needed to cover. When Lily came back to him at the door, her expression was the complex one she wore when she had more feelings than she knew the words for yet. Christine stopped a few feet away. She looked at Ethan with the directness of someone delivering something she'd rehearsed but still found difficult. "Thank you," she said, "for how you've handled things. Her voice caught slightly. She steadied it. "She's a really remarkable kid." He held her gaze. There was a version of this moment where the things that had been hard were still hard, where the residue of the years between them made everything transactional and guarded. He was aware of that version. He chose a different one. Not for Christine, for Lily, who was standing next to him and watching. "She is," he said. "I'll let you know how she's doing." Christine nodded. She looked at Lily. "I meant what I said. You can text if you want." Lily said, "Okay." Not enthusiastically, not coldly, just, "Okay." The appropriate size of a response to a thing that had not yet earned more than okay. They walked to the car. Lily was quiet for the first few blocks, watching the city go past the window. Then she said, "She has a dog." "I didn't know that." "A rescue one. It's named Pretzel." "That's a good name." She said it came with the name. Lily was looking out the window. She said she thought about changing it, but it had already been through a lot, and she didn't want to make it adjust to something new. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Makes sense." She said she's been going to therapy. Lily said this matter-of-factly. I asked her why she left, and she said she wasn't in a good place, and she knew she wasn't, and she thought leaving was better than staying and being bad at it. A pause. She said she was wrong about that. He was very careful with his response. What did you think when she said that? Lily looked at the window for a long moment. I think she was probably right that she wasn't in a good place, she said finally. I think she was wrong about the other part. He nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm not like angry at her, Lily said. I thought I might be when I saw her, but I wasn't. She seemed slightly puzzled by this about herself, as if she had prepared for a feeling that hadn't arrived. I'm just I don't know what I am. That's okay. I know. I just thought I'd know. Feelings take a while to sort out sometimes. There's no deadline. She accepted this. Then she said, Can we go to Miss Victoria's? He had halfway expected this. She might be working. I'll text her. Lily, I want to tell her. She was looking at him in the mirror now, clear and direct. Not because I'm sad. I just want to tell her. She's the person I want to tell things to. He looked at the road. There was a complicated warmth in his chest that he didn't try to organize into words. Text her, he said. Lily had her tablet out before he finished the sentence. Victoria was not working. Or she was, but she stopped. Her building was 15 minutes from where they were, and when they pulled into the visitor parking, she was already in the lobby. Not because she'd been waiting, but because her building's coffee machine on the 6th floor was broken and she'd been going to the lobby cafe anyway, which she explained while handing Lily a hot chocolate she'd somehow already ordered and was still warm. How did you know she'd want hot chocolate? Ethan said. She always wants hot chocolate when she's had a day. Victoria said it simply, like it was obvious. He looked at his daughter, who was wrapping both hands around the cup with the deep satisfaction of someone whose needs have been correctly anticipated without asking. She's right, Lily confirmed. I always want hot chocolate. They went up to Victoria's apartment, the one Lily had discussed the balcony of with a view to future grilling operations, which had the particular tidiness of a space where someone lived alone and also spent considerable time working from home, meaning organized in the specific way of someone who needed to be able to find things quickly. There were plants on the windowsill that Ethan had helped her pick out, and that had subsequently been named by Lily on a previous visit. The middle one, a trailing pothos, was named Gerald. Lily curled into the corner of the couch with her hot chocolate and began with the methodical thoroughness of a person giving a full debrief, telling Victoria everything about the meeting with Christine. Not performing it, just telling it, the way she told things to people she trusted completely, which was to say with all the messy middle parts included and without trying to make it sound more or less than it was. Victoria listened the way she listened to Lily, which was the same way she listened to everyone who mattered to her, fully, without her phone in her hand, without the half attention of someone already preparing their response. When Lily finished, she said, That sounds like it was a lot. It was, Lily agreed, but not like a bad a lot, just a big one. Those can be harder sometimes. Yeah. Lily looked at her hot chocolate. She has a dog named Pretzel. I heard. I kind of want to meet Pretzel. That seems like a reasonable thing to want. I don't know if I want to see her again, though. My mom. I don't know yet. You don't have to decide that today. I know, Dad said that too. Your dad is right. Lily looked between them. The particular gaze that meant she was making an observation she might or might not share. Then she said, apparently deciding to share it, You both say the same things a lot. Victoria looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the ceiling. Do we? Victoria said carefully. Yeah. Not like the same words, but like the same idea. Lily waved her hand vaguely. Like you think the same way about stuff. Neither of them answered this. The silence lasted exactly long enough for Lily to interpret it. Are you guys like together now? She said. The directness of it landed with the particular impact of a child who has decided that the adult practice of not saying things directly is inefficient. Ethan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Ethan. Lily, he started. I'm just asking. She was not embarrassed. She was curious. Because you act different than before. Different how? Victoria said, which was the same tactic she'd used at the diner, asking Lily to articulate rather than deflecting. Lily thought about it. Like, before, it was like you were both trying not to look at each other too much, like in a way where looking would mean something. She said this with the casual authority of someone reporting a thing they'd observed. And now you don't do that. You just look. The apartment was very quiet. That's very perceptive, Victoria said. I know. Lily drank her hot chocolate. So are you? Ethan leaned forward and put his elbows on his knees and looked at his daughter and decided that the approach that had gotten them here, carefully not saying the thing, was not the right one going forward. Not with her. She was too good at seeing. We're figuring it out, he said. But yeah, it's different than before. Lily processed this. Different like better or different like complicated? Both, Victoria said. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied by the honesty of this. Okay, she said. I thought so. She uncurled herself from the couch. Can I water Gerald? He looks a little dry. Victoria stood. I'll show you where the watering can is. They went to the kitchen. Ethan stayed on the couch and heard Lily's voice and Victoria's voice and the sound of water running, and then Lily saying, with great authority, this much. Gerald doesn't like too much. And Victoria saying, how do you know how much Gerald likes? And Lily saying, I can tell by the leaves. He sat in the living room in the July afternoon and let the sound of them in the kitchen be what it was, which was the specific music of his actual life, imperfect and unresolved and full of things still being figured out, and still, somehow, in spite of all of it, exactly right. The 4th of July came 9 days later. The Hayes house was decorated with more enthusiasm than coordination, as it always was when Patricia decided something deserved celebrating, which was most things. There were red and blue streamers along the porch railing, a flag that Richard had put up that morning with great ceremony, and someone, almost certainly Marcus, had acquired a quantity of sparklers that seemed disproportionate to the number of children present. Aunt Sandra was there before everyone else, which was not surprising. She had commandeered the best lawn chair, positioned it for maximum visibility of the driveway, and was there when Ethan pulled in. She raised her glass as he got out of the car. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The afternoon assembled itself the way Hayes family gatherings assembled, out of noise and food and the specific overlapping conversations of people who had known each other long enough to have shorthand for everything. Richard was at the grill. Patricia was everywhere at once. Marcus had brought his girlfriend, a woman named Sonia, who had been mentioned several times over the past few months, and who turned out to be, in person, exactly as direct and funny as the description suggested. Lily attached herself to Sonia within approximately 12 minutes, which Ethan took as a positive indicator of Sonia's character. Victoria arrived with a container of the potato salad she'd been specifically requested to bring for 3 years running, a recipe from a colleague that she'd made once, and that Patricia had immediately annexed into the permanent party rotation. She carried it to the kitchen, exchanged approximately 45 seconds of conversation with her mother that Ethan couldn't hear, but that ended with Patricia squeezing her face between both hands the way she did with all 3 of her children when she was feeling something she couldn't say, and then came out to the backyard. She found him by the back fence, same fence they'd strung the lights along at the graduation party 6 weeks ago, which felt at this point like it had happened in a slightly different version of his life and also like it had just happened. Sandra's watching, she said. Sandra's always watching. She actually gave me a thumbs up when I came through the gate. She's going to be telling this story for 30 years. She already is. She called Deborah, apparently. Victoria set her empty container down on the nearby table. Deborah from Charlotte. I hope Deborah from Charlotte is happy for us. She says it was obvious from the first time she met you, 3 years ago, at the Christmas thing. I wasn't even... That was before any of this. I know. Victoria looked at the yard. She said she could tell then. She said I had a specific face I made. What face? Apparently I will demonstrate it if you do anything funny. He looked at her sideways. She was looking at the yard with deliberate neutrality, which meant she was working to maintain it, which meant the expression was not far below the surface. Victoria. What? Look at me. She turned her head. He looked at her face, the actual unreconstructed version, the one she didn't curate. He watched what happened in it when she met his eyes without pulling back. He understood what Deborah from Charlotte had meant. "Okay," he said. "Okay, what?" "I get it, the face thing." She turned back to the yard. "Stop. I'm not saying anything." "You're saying things with your face." "We apparently both do that." She exhaled in a way that was almost a laugh. "I hate that you're right about that." "You hate it very quietly for someone who hates it." She was fully smiling now, still looking at the yard, still not making a production of it. This was the version of her he had known was real for years, the one underneath the composure, not opposed to it but older than it, less constructed. He had been the person she let see it for a long time. He was just done pretending that meant something ordinary. Marcus appeared from nowhere, in the way he always did at parties when something was happening that he decided he had an opinion about. He planted himself next to Ethan with a plate of food and the expression of someone who has been waiting to say something since approximately June. "So," he said. "Not you too," Ethan said. "I just want to say, Marcus," Victoria said. "I'm going to say it. Marcus." "She's been my sister for 30 years, Marcus said to Ethan, with the calm seriousness of someone giving a genuine speech rather than a joke one. "I've seen her with a lot of people in a lot of situations. I've seen her when she's trying and when she's not, and when she's scared, and when she doesn't know she's scared." He ate a bite of something. "And I've never seen her look at anybody the way she looks at you, since I was like 17 and first noticed it." Silence. "That's..." Ethan started. "I'm not done." Marcus held up the fork. "I also want to say that if you hurt her, I will make your life difficult in ways you can't anticipate, because I am creative and I have time. But I don't think that's going to be an issue, because you've been around for 6 years, and you've never given me a reason to say that." He looked between them. "So, good." He ate another bite. "That's all I had." He wandered back toward the food table. Victoria was looking at the sky with the expression of someone asking the universe for patience. "He's been waiting to do that since June," she said. "I could tell. It was prepared. He practiced it. He admitted that. He's a good brother." She looked at him. "Yeah," she said quietly. "He is." The evening arrived gradually, the long summer kind that gave you every possible version of the light before it finally committed to dark. The sparklers came out around 8, which Marcus distributed with the energy of someone who had been looking forward to this specific moment since acquiring them. Lily held hers with the focused intensity of someone who understood she was holding fire and found this extraordinary rather than alarming, which Ethan found both concerning and completely characteristic. He stood near her, close enough to matter. She drew her name in the air with the light, the letters dissolving before she finished writing them. "Can I do a heart?" she asked. "Quick one." She drew a lopsided heart that listed heavily to the left before disappearing. She looked at it with satisfaction. "Miss Victoria," she called. Victoria was 3 feet away. "Yeah." "Did you see my heart?" "I saw it. It was a little crooked. Hearts usually are." Lily considered this. "That's actually really deep," she said. Ethan pressed his lips together. Victoria looked at the sparkler in her own hand. "Ready?" Marcus said from somewhere behind them, and lit the next round, and the backyard filled briefly with small moving lights and the smell of sulfur and the sounds of people who were all, in their various ways, exactly where they wanted to be. Later, after the sparklers were done, and Lily had been pried away from Sonia with the promise that Marcus would bring her to the next family thing, after Richard had played his guitar again and Sandra had finally said goodnight with a look that communicated several paragraphs in the space of 2 seconds, after Patricia had hugged Ethan at the door the way she'd been hugging him for years, which was the hug of someone who had long ago decided he was hers too. Later, Ethan and Victoria stood on the porch after everyone else had gone inside, in the specific quiet of a party that had ended well. Lily was asleep on the couch inside. She'd made it 40 minutes past her normal bedtime on the strength of pure determination, and then dropped without ceremony, and no one had moved her because she looked peaceful, and the couch was comfortable, and Richard had draped a blanket over her with the same quiet competence he applied to most things. The porch was cool. The yard was dark except for the string lights along the fence. The The same ones they had hung in June, still in place and still working except for a section near the far corner that had gone out sometime in the past few weeks and that no one had gotten around to fixing. "The lights," he said. "I know, I keep meaning to." "I'll look at it." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She looked at the dark section, then at the rest of it, which still held its glow, warm and white against the summer dark. "My mom asked me," she said, "what I wanted." He looked at her. "Last week. She asked what I actually wanted, not with the company or the next 5 years or any of that." Victoria's voice was careful but not fragile. "She asked what I wanted from my personal life. What would make me feel like I was living it, not managing it." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I wasn't sure I knew the difference yet." A pause. That was only half true. He waited. "The other half," she said, "is that I've known for a while what makes a day feel real versus what makes it feel like something I'm moving through to get to the next thing." She looked at the lights. "Thursday mornings are real. Tuesday dinners are real. Your apartment on a Wednesday night when Lily's figured out some new project that requires structural support." The corner of her mouth moved. "Those are real." "Victoria." "I know." She turned to look at him directly. I'm not asking for a declaration. I'm not building to a speech. I'm just saying that I know what's real, and I'm done treating it like something I need to be careful about." She held his gaze. "I'm done being careful about you." He looked at her for a long moment. The porch was quiet. Inside the house, faintly, he could hear Marcus and Sonia talking, and the familiar underlying noise of a family house settling into the end of its evening. 6 years, he said. "I know. We were so... I know. We wasted a lot of time being afraid of the wrong thing." "Yeah." She didn't look away. "We did." He reached over and took her hand. Not the way he'd held it in the living room 6 weeks ago. That had been tentative, the gesture of someone testing whether a thing was real. This was the other kind, the kind that came after the testing, when you already knew the answer. She held on. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Okay." "I don't have a plan for how this looks going forward. I don't know the structure of it. I know there's Lily, and I know there's your company, and I know both of those things make this more complicated than it would be otherwise. I know that. I'm just saying I'm not walking into this with a roadmap. I'm walking into it because it's you, and that's enough of a reason." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've run a company since I was 26. I've had a plan for almost everything." A pause. "I don't want a plan for this. I want to..." She exhaled slowly. "I want to just see what it is, without deciding in advance what it's supposed to look like." That might be the least Victoria sentence you've ever said. I know, it felt strange coming out. Good strange? "Ask me again in 6 months." He laughed. Real, short, the kind that came out before he decided whether it was appropriate, which was the only kind worth having. She laughed too, and it dissolved something in the air that had still been holding a slight tension, the last remaining fiber of 6 years of careful restraint finally letting go. He put his arm around her and she leaned into it, not dramatically, not like a moment being performed, just leaning, the way people leaned when they were tired and trusted where they were. The lights along the fence held their glow. The broken section stayed dark. Neither of them was looking at it anymore. Inside the house, Lily shifted on the couch in her sleep and said something that wasn't quite a word, and then was still again. This was the thing neither of them had been able to calculate in advance. Not in all the years of careful friendship, all the years of holding exactly the right amount of distance. That love, when you stopped managing it, didn't feel like the thing you'd been afraid of. It felt like the thing you recognized. It felt like a Tuesday dinner that ran long and a Thursday morning that became the best part of someone's week without anyone planning it that way. It felt like knowing which shelf the extension cord was on. It felt like a key under the mat that you'd stopped asking about because it had simply become part of how things worked. It felt like someone who'd been watching the whole arc of you and staying anyway. There was nothing perfect about any of it. The mornings would still have too much logistics in them and not enough time. There would be nights when she'd go quiet in the way she did when something was wrong, and he'd have to resist the pull toward fixing rather than listening. There would be Lily asking the exact wrong question at the exact wrong moment with the exact right instinct. There would be Christine, somewhere in the distance, a variable that hadn't fully resolved. There would be the company and the client meetings and the school pickups and the ordinary, relentless machinery of two complicated lives that had not been designed to merge, but were going to have to figure out how anyway. None of that had disappeared. But here was what was also true. They had been building something for 6 years without calling it what it was. They had been building it in the 1,000 ordinary choices to show up, to stay on the phone, to drive the 22 minutes, to save the jacket, to know the coffee order, to put the key under the mat and not ask for it back. They had been building it in every conversation that ran too long, and every silence that was comfortable enough to sit in, and every moment that should have been nothing but was somehow everything. You didn't get to decide, usually, when something became real. You only got to decide at some point whether to admit it. They had taken 6 years to admit it, and that was going to be the part of the story they told wrong to people later, because it would sound like wasted time, like a failure of courage, like something that should have happened sooner. And maybe it should have, but the years hadn't been nothing. The years were the reason they knew each other the way they did, without illusion, without the particular softening that happened when you loved someone you hadn't yet seen at their worst, and their most ordinary, and their most afraid. They had seen all of it, and chosen it anyway. That was not something you rushed. That was something you earned, slowly, in the daily accumulation of choosing the same person until the choosing became so habitual you forgot it was a choice. Until one afternoon, at a graduation party, someone said the quiet part out loud, and you looked at what you'd been building and understood that it had a name, and the name was not complicated, and you had known it all along. Victoria leaned her head slightly against his shoulder. "The lights need to be fixed," she said. "I'll do it next weekend." "You'll forget." "I won't forget. I'll remind you. I know you will." The night sat around them, warm and unhurried, full of the sounds of a summer evening in a neighborhood that did not know or care that anything of significance had occurred in it. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A car passed. The string lights held on, most of them, steady and quiet in the dark. Inside the house, Ethan's daughter slept on the Hayes family couch, with a blanket around her shoulders that Richard had placed there without making a thing of it, because that was the kind of man he was. And because Lily had been coming to this house long enough that no one asked anymore why she was there. She was there because she belonged to someone who belonged here. That was the whole of it. That was enough.